I never used to believe the stories people told about night drives, you know? Those late night tales where you're all alone on some back road, and then something happens. But last week, I found out for myself just how real those stories can get. It started out as a simple plan, a late drive to clear my head. I had just broken up with my girlfriend, wasn't sleeping well, and figured a good, quiet night drive might help me think. So, around midnight, I grabbed my keys, hopped in my old SUV, and headed down a familiar highway out of town. After half an hour, the city lights faded behind me, and all that lay ahead were dark, open roads. The first hour passed smoothly, just the hum of my engine, a few lonely stars overhead, and the occasional distant glow of a farm light. I even started to feel a bit better, like maybe this was exactly what I needed. But soon enough, things took a turn. Literally, I found myself driving through stretches of woods, where the trees hung over the road, nearly blotting out the sky. Then, without thinking, I took a wrong turn. This road wasn't on any map, and it wasn't like the other back roads in the area. The trees on either side loomed close and seemed to move, almost like they were reaching out, trying to close in on me. A chill crept up my spine, but I shook it off. After all, it was just trees and shadows, right? After a few miles, I realized I hadn't seen a single house, sign, or even another car. Nothing but my headlights slicing through the darkness. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. That's when I saw it. Just ahead, on the shoulder of the road, there was a figure, a woman. She was standing still, facing away from me, her silhouette backlit by my headlights. She wore a long coat that flapped slightly in the wind, and her hair hung limp around her shoulders, completely unmoving. I slowed down, heart racing. It was the middle of nowhere, in the dead of night. Who just stands there like that? Logic kicked in, telling me she was probably stranded. Maybe her car had broken down further up, but I didn't see any other vehicles around. Something about her posture made my skin crawl. She stood too straight, too rigid, like she was frozen in place. Rolling to a stop, I lowered my window a bit. "Hey, are you all right?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't move, not even a flinch, no sign that she heard me. Just still. I swallowed hard, debating what to do. Every instinct was telling me to just drive away, leave her in my dust and never look back. But something compelled me to try again. "Miss, do you need help?" I tried a little louder. Nothing. She was so close that my headlights illuminated her bare feet on the cracked asphalt, pale and dirty. No shoes, no belongings. Just her standing there, as if she'd walked out of the woods barefoot and waited for someone to find her. I was about to pull away when, slowly, she turned around. As her face came into view, a chill stabbed through me. Her skin was ghostly pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were black. Not dark brown or shadowed by the night. Just two pits of absolute black, like they were hollow, going deeper than anything I'd ever seen. She stared directly at me, her lips pulled into the smallest, unsettling smile. For a second, I was frozen. There was something about her eyes that made it feel like I was falling, like I was being pulled into them. My hand trembled on the gear shift, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, in a jerky, unnatural motion, she took a step toward the car. My heart seized up. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires skidding on the gravel as I backed away. Her smile widened, showing teeth that seemed too sharp. She moved again, this time faster, and my stomach dropped as I realized she wasn't just walking. She was gliding, closing the distance between us in an eerie, unnatural way. I pressed the gas harder, speeding backward until I nearly spun off the road. I didn't look back until I'd put about 50 yards between us. When I did, she was gone. My breaths came shallow, hands shaking on the wheel as I tried to pull myself together. Maybe she'd step back into the woods, or maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just exhaustion or stress from the breakup playing tricks on my mind. But when I glanced at my rearview mirror, she was there. She was in the back seat. My heart stopped. She was sitting there, perfectly still, just inches behind me, with those black, empty eyes locked onto mine in the mirror. Her mouth was slightly open, and though I couldn't hear anything over the roar of my own pulse, I could see her lips moving, whispering something I couldn't make out. In a panic, I floored the gas, the engine roaring as the SUV lurched forward, tearing down the road. My eyes flicked between the road and the rearview mirror, unable to look away from her but terrified to see what she would do next. I could feel her presence like ice creeping over the back of my neck, a bone-deep cold that seeped into my spine. Then she started moving, her head tilting from side to side, like she was studying me, her eyes never breaking contact. Her mouth kept moving, the whispering getting faster, almost frantic, though still silent, like she was speaking from some other, unreachable world. I could feel her words pressing in on me, like they were squeezing my mind, tightening around my thoughts. "Who are you?" I choked out, my voice cracking. I didn't expect an answer, but I needed something, some acknowledgement, anything that would ground me in reality. She stopped. Her mouth froze mid-whisper, and for the first time, her eyes shifted. She looked past me out the windshield, her lips parted wider, her expression changing from that eerie smile to something else. An emotion I couldn't quite place, but that felt wrong, twisted. A mixture of anticipation and hunger. And then, in a voice that was barely more than a hiss, she whispered, "You shouldn't have come here." In that instant, all the lights on the dashboard flickered and died, plunging the car into pitch blackness. My breath caught as the car plunged into darkness, every sound swallowed by the thick, oppressive silence. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. My only focus on the shape I knew was sitting in the back seat, lurking in the darkness just behind me. Desperate, I fumbled for my phone, but my fingers trembled so much that I dropped it onto the floor mat. As I leaned down to grab it, I heard a slow, dragging sound coming from the back seat. My mind went numb. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. I lifted my eyes to the rearview mirror, and there she was, closer now, her face inches from mine, those black eyes peering directly into me. Before I could scream, her cold hand brushed my shoulder. It felt like a frozen claw, seeping all warmth from my skin. I jerked forward, yanking the door handle, desperate to escape. But the door was locked, and no matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't budge. Her grip tightened, her fingers like ice around my shoulder, anchoring me in place. "Let me go!" I shouted, my voice sounding weak and hollow in the confined space. She tilted her head again, that horrible smile creeping across her face as if my terror was something she could taste. "You can't leave now," she whispered, her voice low and echoing, like a draft passing through a long-forgotten hallway. "Not after you've seen me." The words echoed in my skull, filling me with a dizzying, consuming dread. I forced myself to look back at the road, praying that if I just kept driving, I'd somehow shake her loose. Then, suddenly, she leaned in close, her icy breath grazing my neck, and whispered something that still chills me to the bone. "Look outside." Against every instinct, I turned my head, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The road had disappeared. The road was gone. My headlights cut through nothing but an endless, suffocating fog, a swirling gray void stretching in every direction. The trees, the asphalt, the familiar lines that should have been guiding me, they had all vanished, swallowed up by an impossible expanse that had no beginning or end. My stomach twisted. I felt trapped in some other place, like I'd driven right out of the world I knew and into a nightmare that didn't want me to leave. In the mirror, she was still there, watching me with those dark, hollow eyes, her mouth twisted into that grotesque grin. Slowly, she leaned forward, her lips just inches from my ear. "Do you understand now?" she whispered. Her voice was an icy breeze, each word creeping into my bones. "You came here. You wanted this." "I don't know what you mean," I shouted, trying to fight the rising panic clawing at my throat. "I just took a wrong turn. I didn't mean to." "Didn't you?" Her voice interrupted, cold and mocking. "Or have you been searching for this your whole life? For something to fear, something to make your heart race, something real?" Her words burrowed into my mind like icy needles, sharp and relentless. She was right. In a way, I had been looking for something. That thrill, that edge of danger. But this wasn't a thrill. This was real, and every second spent in her presence was draining the life out of me. Without thinking, I gripped the wheel harder, pressing the gas in a desperate attempt to escape this fog, this endless nothingness. I could hear her laughter, a cold, hollow sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the fog itself was mocking me. "You can't run from me," she whispered, her voice filling the car like it was seeping through the very walls. "I'm part of this road. I've been here long before you, and I'll be here long after." Something in her tone, a smug, cruel amusement, unleashed a surge of anger in me, breaking through the terror. "I'm getting out of here," I growled, and jerked the wheel to the left, turning sharply into the fog, hoping to somehow find the road again. But the moment I turned, the car jerked violently. The steering wheel locked, the brakes went dead, and my headlights flickered as if the car itself was giving up. And then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The car stalled, headlights flickering one last time before plunging me into total darkness. A heavy, unnatural silence filled the air. It was so thick I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, each thud echoing like a countdown. In the stillness, I realized I couldn't feel her anymore. That icy presence, the clawing grip on my shoulder. She was gone. For a moment, I almost let myself believe it was over, that I was alone again. Then I heard a soft, scraping sound, right outside the driver's side window. I held my breath, listening as the scraping grew louder, a slow, deliberate drag against the glass. The sound crawled into my ears, sinking deep, rooting me in terror. My hand crept toward the window controls, fingers trembling, but I stopped. Some part of me knew that I didn't want to see what was out there, that whatever I'd find on the other side of that glass was something I was never meant to see. But the sound persisted. It was taunting me, like it knew I wouldn't be able to resist. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned my head. The fog outside was thick and impenetrable, swirling in slow, silent waves. But just inches away from me, pressed against the glass, was a hand. Pale, skeletal fingers dragging across the window, leaving streaks of dark, oily residue in its wake. My heart hammered. The fingers were too long, too thin, like something that hadn't been human in a very, very long time. They moved slowly, purposefully, as though savoring the moment, drawing circles, patterns I didn't recognize, symbols that made no sense but filled me with a deep, primal dread. And then, slowly, the hand began to retreat, sliding down the glass. I watched, paralyzed, as it disappeared into the mist, leaving only the dark, oily streaks behind. I thought that was the end of it, that maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, out of the fog, a face emerged. It was her, the woman from the road. Only now, her face was different. The eyes were wider, hollow pits that seemed to suck in the darkness around them. Her mouth was stretched into an unnatural smile, lips pulled back so far that they nearly split her cheeks. Her skin, pale and almost translucent, pressed against the glass as she leaned closer, her empty eyes locking onto mine. She spoke, but her lips didn't move. The voice was inside my head, clawing at my thoughts, drowning out everything else. "Don't you see? You've crossed over now. There's no going back." My hand shot to the ignition, fumbling desperately as I tried to start the engine. But it wouldn't turn over. The car was dead, just like everything around me. Panic surged as I twisted the key again and again, praying for anything. A spark, a rumble, even a flicker of light. Nothing. I looked up. She was still there, her face pressed harder against the glass, her smile wider, as if she could feel my desperation. With a final, gut-wrenching lurch of terror, I did the only thing I could think of. I opened the door. The fog poured into the car, cold and damp, wrapping around me as I stumbled out. I broke into a run, sprinting blindly into the mist. No sense of where I was going or if there was anywhere to go. I just knew I had to get away. But the further I ran, the thicker the fog became, swirling around me like a living thing, wrapping tighter and tighter until I could barely see my own hands. My footsteps echoed in an endless void, each step sounding farther away, like I was drifting out of myself, deeper into some place where time and distance didn't matter. Then, somewhere in the fog, I heard her voice again, soft and mocking, drifting closer with every word. "You can run, but you'll never leave. You're part of this road now, just like me." And that's when I saw them. Figures emerging from the fog, one by one, lining the edges of this endless, empty road. Faces pale and hollow, eyes black as pitch, mouths stretched wide in silent screams. They watched me, motionless, as if they'd been waiting for me all along. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I turned to run the other way, only to see her standing directly in my path, smiling that same twisted smile. Her eyes were wide, hungry, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Welcome to the road," she whispered, her voice echoing through the fog. "You'll be here forever." And then, everything went dark. I don't remember how long I was out. When I came to, I was lying on the cold asphalt, staring up at a sky as black and empty as her eyes had been. The fog was gone, but everything was silent. Too silent. I sat up slowly, feeling every muscle in my body ache as if I'd been frozen there for hours. My car was still there, a few feet away, headlights dim but flickering as if they were struggling to stay alive. The fog had left strange smears across the windows and body, dark, oily streaks and shapes I couldn't quite make out, but they filled me with that same deep, bone-chilling dread. Shakily, I got to my feet, glancing around. The figures that had been watching me were gone. It was just me, my car, and an endless empty road stretching out in both directions under that impossibly dark sky. I wanted to believe I just had some kind of breakdown or vivid nightmare, that everything I'd seen was just my imagination, some trick my mind had played on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. With trembling hands, I climbed back into the driver's seat. The engine sputtered to life on the first try, as if the car itself was as desperate to leave this place as I was. I didn't waste any time. I slammed the car into drive and sped down the road, refusing to look back, refusing to even glance at the mirrors. The road felt endless, and the darkness pressed in on every side, swallowing up my headlights as if I was driving through the belly of some great, ancient beast. I drove for what felt like hours, hands clenching the wheel so tight they began to cramp, my eyes glued to the road ahead, waiting, dreading, for her face to reappear. Finally, a faint glow appeared in the distance. Streetlights, the familiar golden glow of civilization. Relief flooded over me, and I pressed the gas harder, desperate to reach the safety of those lights, of anything that looked remotely like normal. As I crossed under the first streetlight, everything changed. The hum of insects, the distant hum of traffic, the faint smell of gasoline and asphalt. All of it hit me at once, grounding me, pulling me back to reality. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her face leering back at me. But there was nothing, just an empty, ordinary road stretching out behind me. I kept driving until I reached the city, the familiarity of buildings and street signs calming my nerves. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station, hands still shaking as I parked and sat in silence, letting the reality of what I'd just been through sink in. When I finally stepped out, I noticed something on the rear window. Dark, oily smears, the same strange symbols I'd seen on the car when I woke up. I stared at them, the memory of her whispering voice echoing in my mind. "You're part of this road now, just like me." I scrubbed at the stains with a rag, but no matter how hard I tried, they wouldn't come off. Now, every time I drive at night, I feel it. That strange pull, that sense that I could take one wrong turn and end up back there, back on that endless, fog-choked road. And every so often, I catch a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. Just for a second, the faint outline of a figure, standing far back on the edge of my headlights, watching, waiting. And every time, I hear her voice, faint and mocking, as if she's right there, whispering in my ear. "You'll be back." A few weeks passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Every night, as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. Driving at night became a test of will. Even if I only had to go a few blocks, I felt that same pull, that invisible thread tugging me back toward that endless road, that fog, and her. One night, I was driving home from a late shift, exhausted but too wired to go straight to bed. The streets were empty, just the occasional flicker of a streetlight cutting through the darkness. I was lost in my own thoughts, replaying that night over and over, when something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. It was the barest hint of movement, a flicker, like a shadow that didn't belong. I glanced up, heart pounding, and there she was, In the distance, standing dead center in the middle of the road, her pale figure illuminated just briefly by my brake lights before disappearing into the shadows. My stomach twisted. It was impossible. I'd left her behind. I'd escaped, hadn't I? But as I stared into the mirror, dread wrapped around me, squeezing the air from my lungs. She was still there, her form half hidden in the darkness, her face barely visible. Just the glint of her eyes, empty and endless, and that smile, a slit of darkness that seemed to widen, mocking me, reminding me that I was never really free. I tried to speed up, but the car felt heavy, like something was pressing against it, dragging me backward. The lights on the dashboard flickered, and the familiar static crackled through the radio, filling the car with that chilling hum, that endless hiss of white noise. I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, my gaze darting between the road ahead and the mirror. My mind raced, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a hallucination born of exhaustion and fear. But every time I looked back, she was closer. Each glance brought her nearer, her face coming into sharper, more horrifying detail. The gaunt, lifeless features, the twisted smile, and those eyes that seemed to pull me into a depth I could never escape. Then the static grew louder, drowning out everything else. My vision blurred, and for one horrifying moment, I couldn't tell where I was. The road, the car, the city, all of it faded, replaced by a thick, suffocating fog. I was back on that road. My heart hammered as I gripped the wheel, desperately trying to fight the pull, but it was no use. The fog wrapped around the car like tendrils, pressing in on me, filling the air with that familiar, icy chill. I looked into the mirror again, and this time she wasn't far behind me. She was right there, her face filling the glass, close enough that I could see the dark hollows of her eyes and the cracked, broken skin around her mouth. "Welcome back," she whispered, her voice slicing through the static, cold and hollow. I slammed my foot on the brakes, but the car didn't stop. It kept rolling forward, deeper into the fog, deeper into that endless, empty road. My headlights flickered and dimmed, and in the faint glow, I saw them. The figures lining the sides of the road, their hollow eyes watching, their twisted, silent faces locked on me as I passed. "You're one of us now," her voice echoed, growing louder, as if it was coming from inside my head. I looked in the mirror one last time, and saw her smile spread wider, impossibly wide, stretching across her face until it was nothing but darkness. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was back on the familiar city street, my car idling at a stoplight. My hands were cold, my body drenched in sweat, and the memory of that road, that fog, and her face burned into my mind. I glanced around, hoping it was over, that I was really back. But in the rearview mirror, smeared across the back window, were those same oily symbols. Now, I don't drive at night. I can't. Because every time I sit behind the wheel after dark, I feel it. The pull of that road, calling to me. And I know that someday, whether it's tomorrow or years from now, I'll take that wrong turn again. And this time, I might not come back. But avoiding night drives didn't end the nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see her face looming out of the fog, those hollow, black eyes pulling me into their depths. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, gasping for air, with her whisper still ringing in my ears. "You're one of us now." It got so bad that I started leaving every light in my house on at night, as if somehow that would keep her and that cursed road from finding me. I even sold the car, convinced that maybe it was connected to whatever happened to me. But none of it made a difference. The pull was still there, like a weight pressing on me, dragging me back to that impossible stretch of road. The final straw came one night when I was staying at a friend's place, hoping that maybe being around someone else would keep the nightmares away. We had stayed up late watching movies, and I'd finally started to feel a little at ease. But around 2 a.m., just as I was drifting off on the couch, I heard it, that static. It started faint, like the hum of an old television, growing louder until it filled the room. My heart pounded as I sat up, glancing around. The sound wasn't coming from the TV or the radio. It was just there, filling the air, vibrating in my bones. I looked over at my friend, but he was fast asleep, completely unaware of the noise that was now rattling my skull. Then I heard her voice, woven into the static, whispering from somewhere just beyond my sight. "It's time." I scrambled off the couch, heart racing, stumbling toward the door. But as I reached for the handle, the air grew cold, freezing, and the lights flickered. I stopped dead, my breath visible in the icy air, and in that moment, I knew she had found me. With a trembling hand, I slowly turned around, and there, in the dim, flickering light, she was standing at the end of the hallway, half hidden in shadow, her black eyes fixed on me. Her mouth twisted into that same sickening smile, and she took a slow, deliberate step toward me. My knees went weak. I backed away, hands fumbling for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. The static grew louder, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts, until her whisper cut through again, clear and cold. "You belong to the road." My vision blurred, the walls around me fading, melting away into darkness, until I was no longer in my friend's house. I was back on that road, the fog thick around me, her figure drifting closer with every step. My body felt paralyzed, rooted to the spot as she approached, her smile widening as if she could taste my fear. The last thing I remember was her reaching out, her icy fingers brushing my cheek, her voice wrapping around me like a shroud. "Welcome home." I woke up hours later, lying in the middle of a deserted road, my clothes damp from the morning dew, with no memory of how I got there. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented, and realized with horror that I recognized the place. The empty stretch of road, the fog hanging in the trees, the silence pressing down like a weight. It was the same road, and as I stood there, shivering, the fog began to creep forward, curling around my ankles, pulling me toward the darkness beyond. I haven't told anyone about what happened that night. I don't know if anyone would believe me, or if they'd even understand, but I know this. No matter where I go, no matter how far I run, the road is always waiting, calling to me. A whisper in the dark that grows louder with every passing night. I don't know how much longer I can resist, but I do know this. One day, I'll have no choice. I'll follow that whisper. I'll return to the road. And this time, I won't be coming back. It's been 6 months now, and every day feels like a countdown. A slow descent into something I can't stop. The pull has only grown stronger, gnawing at me from the inside. A hollow ache that fills my dreams and bleeds into my waking life. Every night, I hear the static just as I'm drifting off. A low hiss that never stops, always there. As if she's whispering to me from somewhere just beyond the edge of my mind. I've tried everything to escape it. I moved to a different city, sold nearly everything I owned, took a job on the opposite coast where I'd never have to drive alone at night. But it doesn't matter. She's always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to make that one mistake, to let my guard down just enough for her to slip through the cracks and pull me back to that endless road. Last night, it happened again. I was on my way home, taking the bus this time, trying to avoid anything that would put me behind the wheel. The streets were dark, rain tapping against the windows as we moved down the empty highway. I was exhausted, my eyes heavy, fighting to stay awake, when I saw her. She was standing on the side of the road, just outside the glow of the streetlights, her figure faint but unmistakable. She didn't move, just stood there, watching the bus pass, her eyes following me as if to remind me that she'd never really left. I closed my eyes, praying she'd be gone when I looked again. But when I opened them, she was closer, standing on the opposite side of the street now, her face barely visible through the fog. She was smiling, that wide, twisted smile that seemed to cut through the darkness itself. I turned away, heart racing, hands gripping the edge of my seat, but it didn't matter. She was inside my mind, filling it with that sickening whisper, her words curling around my thoughts, taking root. "You can't escape me," she said, her voice soft and mocking. "You're part of this road, and one day you'll come back." The bus pulled to a stop just a few blocks from my apartment. I bolted out, sprinting through the rain, barely able to see where I was going, just desperate to get away from her, from that smile, that voice. I made it home, slamming the door behind me, my pulse pounding as I leaned against the wood, eyes shut tight. I thought I was safe. I thought that, at least for the night, I'd escaped her. But when I opened my eyes, I saw something that froze me to the core. There, smeared across my apartment window, were the same oily symbols I'd seen on my car that night. The dark, twisted shapes that looked like nothing and everything all at once, like they were meant to draw you in and trap you forever. And in the center, drawn in one long, jagged stroke, was a single word. Soon. That was last night. Now, as I sit here, typing this out in a last, desperate attempt to cling to reality, to remind myself that I still have a choice, I can feel her. She's outside, waiting, her presence thick and inescapable, pressing down on me, pulling me back to that cursed road. I know she'll get me eventually. I know that one day, I'll give in to the pull and find myself back in that fog, alone with her and the endless stretch of darkness. But until then, I'm doing everything I can to stay away, to keep moving, to pretend that I still have some control over my own life. If you're reading this, if you ever find yourself out on a lonely road in the dead of night, and you see a woman standing in the shadows, turn around. Don't look back. Don't stop. Because once she's seen you, once she's marked you, there's no escape. One day she'll find you too. And when she does, you'll understand why. You never make that night drive alone. I didn't sleep last night. I sat up in bed, every light in the apartment on, gripping the edges of the mattress and listening. The static was faint, just barely there, like a distant whisper tangled in the white noise of the world. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, that she wasn't really here, that maybe, just maybe, I could fight this. But the hours dragged on, and every minute felt like the last. Eventually, dawn broke through the windows, casting a pale gray light across the room. For a moment, I almost felt relief. The day brought warmth, noise, the sounds of the city waking up, a blanket of normalcy that almost convinced me I'd been dreaming. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number, just a single, chilling word. Tonight. I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. There was no number, no way to trace it back, just that single word, a promise, a threat. And in that instant, I knew I was out of time. I spent the day in a haze, moving through the motions of work, life, all of it a blur as my mind raced. By evening, I was exhausted, but I couldn't stop. I needed a plan, something, anything, to keep her from dragging me back to that cursed road. I packed a bag, thinking maybe if I just kept moving, kept running, she wouldn't find me. But as the sun set, that familiar heaviness settled over me, like a weight pressing on my chest. The apartment grew colder, shadows lengthening as the last light slipped away. And then the static started. This time, it wasn't just a faint hiss. It was loud, crackling, filling every corner of the room, like she was everywhere, closing in, her presence thick in the air. My phone buzzed again, and I almost didn't want to look, but I couldn't resist. This time, it wasn't a message. It was an image. Picture of my car, parked outside my apartment, and standing next to it, barely visible in the darkness, was her. That twisted smile, those black, empty eyes staring directly into the camera, as if she knew I was looking. Her head tilted, a taunting gesture, daring me to come down. I stumbled backward, panic clawing at my chest, and before I knew it, my feet were moving, taking me out the door and down the stairs, my mind blank with terror. I reached the street, the cool night air hitting me like a slap, and there she was, standing by my car, exactly as she had been in the photo, her figure illuminated by the dim glow of the streetlight. She looked at me, her smile widening, and she took a slow, deliberate step forward. I froze. My instincts screamed to run, to get as far away as possible, but my feet were rooted to the ground. She took another step, her gaze never leaving mine, her presence filling every inch of space between us. "Ready for the drive?" she whispered, her voice a soft, chilling echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Somewhere deep inside, I found the strength to shake my head, to mouth the word no, but she only laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent a wave of nausea through me. "You came this far," she said, tilting her head. "It's too late to turn back now." I don't know what possessed me, but in a last, desperate move, I lunged toward the car, throwing myself into the driver's seat and slamming the door shut. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, turning the key in the ignition, praying it would start. The engine roared to life. Relief washed over me, and I glanced up, hoping maybe she was gone. But she was already in the passenger seat, sitting there as if she'd been waiting the whole time. Her eyes met mine, those dark, endless pits that seemed to pull me in, deeper and deeper, until I could feel myself slipping away, sinking into that same empty void. Her smile widened, and she leaned closer, whispering in my ear, "Drive." With a trembling hand, I put the car in gear, my body moving as if controlled by something outside myself. The car lurched forward, rolling into the night, and the familiar fog began to creep in, swallowing the road, the city, everything. The world outside faded, replaced by that endless stretch of darkness, the same cursed road I'd thought I'd escaped. I drove, helpless to stop, her presence looming beside me, filling the car with an unbearable cold. I don't know how long we've been driving. Time doesn't seem to exist here. The fog is thick, unending, pressing against the windows like it's trying to seep in. Every so often, I catch glimpses of figures on the side of the road, silent watchers, hollow-eyed and still, faces twisted in expressions of eternal dread. And deep down, I know I'm one of them now. I've been driving forever, and I'll drive forevermore, lost on this road that has no end, in the company of the woman who haunts my every mile. I don't know if anyone will find this message, if anyone will understand what I've become. But if you're reading this, if you ever feel that pull to take a night drive, to explore the quiet roads when the world is dark and silent, don't. Because once you're on this road, there's no turning back. You'll be here with us, forever. The truth is, I don't know how I'm sending this, or if it'll even reach anyone who can help. I keep coming back to this phone, watching my fingers type out words I barely understand. Maybe it's some last act of defiance, or maybe she's letting me do it, knowing full well that no one will ever believe me. Or maybe, deep down, she wants you to know. The road stretches on, an endless ribbon of black cutting through a fog that seems alive, pressing in on every side, breathing in sync with the cold, hollow feeling in my chest. There's no horizon, no signposts, no markers of any kind. Just mile after mile of the same featureless void, trapping me in an infinite loop of fear and exhaustion. And no matter how many times I glance at the clock, it's always the same. 3:17 a.m., frozen in place like I've been caught in the jaws of time itself. Every now and then, I feel the car slowing down as if we're coming to a stop. It's almost like the road wants me to get out, to see what's waiting for me in the shadows beyond the fog. But every time, before I can open the door or even look outside, she reaches out, her hand cold and unyielding on my arm, her whisper soft but firm. "Keep driving." I don't argue. I don't have the strength to resist. I just grip the wheel and keep moving forward, letting the endless road swallow me whole. And with every mile that passes, with every twist and turn that feels like it's leading me deeper into some terrible, unknowable place, I feel myself slipping further away, becoming less real, less me. It's like she's unraveling me, piece by piece, erasing every memory, every fragment of who I once was, until all that's left is the road, her presence, and that endless, unbreakable silence. Sometimes I think I hear voices, faint and echoing in the distance, like the memories of people who once traveled this road before me, trapped here, just like I am now. But the voices are thin, wisps of sound that vanish the second I try to focus on them, leaving me with nothing but the cold, empty static that fills every corner of my mind. I wonder if this is what it means to be a ghost, to be caught in a place that doesn't exist, bound to a fate that you can't escape, forever reliving the same nightmare over and over again. I wonder if that's what she is. A ghost, a memory, a piece of something that once lived but was twisted, pulled back by this road, transformed into something dark and hollow. And I wonder if that's what I'm becoming, too. The fog thickens, swallowing the car in an impenetrable gray haze. I can barely see the road anymore, just the faint outline of the pavement stretching out in front of me, leading me deeper, always deeper, into whatever darkness lies at the heart of this place. I glance over at her, hoping, praying for some hint of mercy, some sign that this will end. But she only stares back at me, her eyes empty, unblinking, a void that reflects nothing and sees everything. "Are you ready?" she asks, her voice soft, almost gentle. I don't know what she means. Ready for what? She smiles, a sad, knowing smile that chills me to my bones. To let go, she whispers, leaning closer, her breath cold against my skin. To become one with the road. I shake my head, clutching the wheel tighter, refusing to give in. But even as I fight, I can feel it happening, feel myself unraveling, fading into the fog, becoming just another part of this endless, haunted road. And in that moment, as the last shreds of my will slip away, I understand the truth. There is no escape. The road has claimed me. I don't know what keeps me going now. Maybe it's just habit. My hands locked on the wheel, my foot pressed to the pedal, eyes fixed on the never-ending road. Or maybe it's some stubborn part of me that refuses to let her have the satisfaction of seeing me break completely. But deep down, I know she's already won. I'm just going through the motions, drifting in and out of consciousness, caught somewhere between life and whatever waits for me in the fog. Every so often, she speaks. Her voice is softer now, almost soothing, like she's trying to coax me into surrender, to help me accept what I've become. "It's easier if you let go," she murmurs, her hand brushing my shoulder with a touch that's almost tender. "You're part of the road now. Fighting it will only make it hurt, but I can't let go. I can't bring myself to accept that this is my eternity. Driving this same empty road, surrounded by fog and silence, with her at my side, forever. I don't know how long I've been here. Minutes? Days? Time has lost all meaning. The clock still reads 3:17 a.m., mocking me, trapping me in a single endless moment. Then last night, or maybe it was a week ago, maybe it was a year, something changed. I was driving, as always, eyes heavy, mind numb, when a flash of movement caught my attention. A figure, far up the road, barely visible through the fog. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the mist, a shadow cast by my own headlights. But as I drew closer, the figure took shape. A person, standing on the side of the road, waving their arms. I blinked, heart pounding. Could it be? Someone else? Someone real? I slowed down, my pulse racing, my mind torn between hope and terror. What if it was another trap, another trick she was using to pull me deeper? But the figure seemed solid, real. A man, standing in the road, his face drawn and pale, eyes wide with fear as he watched my car approach. I pulled to a stop, rolling down the window, barely daring to believe it. "Hey!" I called, my voice hoarse, desperate. "Can you hear me?" The man nodded, stumbling forward, his eyes darting nervously to the fog, as if he was afraid of something lurking just out of sight. "Please," he rasped, his voice raw. "Please let me in. I've been walking for days, maybe weeks. I don't know how I got here." My heart twisted. He was like me. Another lost soul,